Hello, my name is Austin Kohler. Welcome to the definitive ranking of Christopher Nolan's filmography, the most objective and uncontested Nolan ranking on the internet. The rules. Nolan's films are compared and put up against each other only. They aren't competing against all movies. Nolan versus Nolan. 12 films compared only against one another. So if, for example, The Dark Knight gets a D grade, it's not a D movie, it's not Twilight, or whatever your D movies are, but it might be Chris's Twilight, if you know what I'm saying. We will be going alphabetically because that feels objective, definitive, and uncontested. Any questions? Good. Leave them in the comments below if you do. And what's better to start with than the Batman trilogy? Batman Begins, a superhero coming-of-age film. This is Nolan's first movie with a big boy budget. Insomnia before's budget was just $46 million. And you young folk watching this might not know how big of a deal this movie really was when it came out back in 2005. The theme of fear explored through the lens of Batman is done so well. It is when Nolan is at his best, when he has strong laser focused on a strong story that's built around an even stronger theme. It's just when Nolan really excels, and Batman Begins has that focus, that laser focus. You can tell that Nolan's getting the hang of handling a large budget, of becoming like a real big boy director. And it's not Nolan perfection, but it's getting close. Batman Begins is Nolan B tier. The Dark Knight. I mean, bro, what can I say that you haven't heard already? Nothing. I can't say anything that you haven't already heard. But you haven't heard it from me, and who doesn't want more Dark Knight hype? It is arguably the best superhero film of all time. It came out in 2008. You know what else came out in 2008? Iron Man. This was the first movie in the MCU. So think about this. With all that competition in all those Marvel movies that have come out since 2008, The Dark Knight is still potentially the best superhero movie ever. And I say potentially because I know there's some strong opinions out there on this, but still, it is definitely in the conversation, and that is crazy considering it came out way before all of its competition. Now, in the context of a Nolan film, this is one of his best acted movies. Shout out to Heath Ledger, except maybe Christian Bale, anytime he's doing the Batman voice, because that's just always bad.
You'll be in a better cell forever.
2006 to 2010 was just peak Nolan. He was doing everything right. He was relatively new to the game. He was still super hungry, super passionate, still trying to make a name for himself. And it all comes through in the very best ways in The Dark Knight. Easy A-tier Nolan. The Dark Knight Rises. Now, it was released between two powerhouses, Inception and Interstellar. And it was coming off of a quartet of bangers in these 2-year rapid successions. The Dark Knight Rises is one of Nolan's weaker films, which could be chalked up to any number of things, but I think that it's probably just kind of the opposite of what I just was talking about with The Dark Knight. His name was made, pressure was off. You know, he'd been grinding, he'd been popping out bangers, and it just makes sense that something was going to slip through the cracks. And it makes even more sense that it would happen when I'm sure he was feeling something like, I'm contracted to do this movie, but I'm really more focused on my cool space movie idea. And this was the first of a handful of his poorly written films. People's biggest complaints, mine included, the movie, you can feel it. It feels rushed. It feels unpolished. Fun fact, it's his most expensive movie. For Chris, I just think The Dark Knight Rises falls to F tier. Dunkirk. First non-Batman movie on our list. Brace yourself, Dunkirk people, because I think I am about to upset some of you. Dunkirk at best is boring, but at worst, Dunkirk is a bad war movie, if you can even call it that. It's essentially a film about 400,000 people waiting to catch an Uber, and it's told out of order. So, and I know I'm aware that there's a joke there about Germans and the Uber, but I'm not totally sure what it is. Dunkirk, what it has going for it is being confused and like trying to get it and then being told out of order. That's the only thing that saves the movie, because if you rearranged it and just told it in sequence how it actually happened, it'd be boring as hell. Nothing would happen. Don't get me wrong. Historically, it's an amazing and special story, and it's amazing that, so many lives were saved, but it's more of like a History Channel sort of story. You know what I'm saying? It's not a Christopher Nolan war epic. Dunkirk is Nolan F tier. Following, Chris's first feature film. Following is excellent, and it really shows off, the talent and the skill of the filmmaker. It's made in a way that highlights a creator's ability to manage resources, to problem solve, lighting, like just really work with a small budget and make something that's compelling and good. So it's really no wonder that Following propelled Nolan the way that it did. Now, just judged on its own as a film put up against the rest of Nolan's filmography, it actually still is good. The twist lands. It requires a rewatch, and not like a Dunkirk or Tenet rewatch where you need to rewatch it because you're confused, but it requires, a fun rewatch where the movie takes on a different meaning when you rewatch it, because the twist, what happens, and you get to see it in a completely different light, like Memento or The Prestige. The dialogue and acting are fine, considering, and honestly, it's still better than in some of his newer films. Following, solid C. Inception. Blah. The hype when this movie came out, man, it just was unreal. Everything was Inceptionized. I mean, I swear, it consumed the zeitgeist for like more than a year. Everything was Inception. And you know what? It deserved, and it still deserves the hype. We're just going to get it out of the way right away. Inception is our first A-tier movie, and I think it's obvious. I mean, come on. Let's talk about it. What makes a good Nolan movie? A compelling story, check. With interesting, believable, and well-acted characters, check, check, check. With competent and unique cinematography and an engaging and emotional score, check, check, double check, triple check. All the things get a big check mark, baby. Inception is a masterpiece in and out of Nolan's filmography. There just is no question about it. A tier, easy. Insomnia. When was the last time you watched Insomnia? Because I'm guessing it wasn't very recently. It just feels like a warm-up. It's a preseason game.
But we talking about practice, man.
Feels like Nolan is stretching his legs. He's getting ready. He's managing and trying to figure out what it's like to take on a bigger budget, a higher-end film. And that's just how this movie comes across. You just feel like he's practicing.
We talking about practice, man.
It's got all the bigs. You got big names, big budget, big crew. It's a big boy movie. It just doesn't do anything special, and it's just kind of boring. It hits like all the proper like how to make a movie notes, but when it comes down to it, Insomnia is just another episode of CBS's Criminal Minds without the Pacino, Swank, Robin ensemble. F tier. Interstellar. Oh, the best score of any Nolan movie. Come at me, bro. If you disagree, you're wrong. I'm sorry. I don't make the rules. This is just the most objective and uncontested Nolan ranking on the internet. But seriously, Hansa's score, obviously, it's amazing. It's exceptional as usual. Nolan, in his movies, he plays with time, almost in all of his movies. But I think that it's done best here and in Inception. He will often play with time in a way that isn't clear until the movie's finished. But here in Interstellar and Inception, and in Tenet actually, we learn about the rules through exposition in the movie. So when he does this right, it will increase that Nolan suspense, that Nolan engagement, and the Nolan drama that we all love and that we all come to his movies to see. Interstellar is also his most rooted in reality fiction. Interstellar is Nolan at his best. From his use of practicals, story depth, A+ acting, sound design, score, mind-bending visuals, and the themes that alter the way that you see and view your like literal time here on Earth and like how you see your life. It's got it all. Interstellar is maybe my favorite Nolan film, but as you know, this is the most objective.
Stop it. Get some help.
we need to talk about pacing. One of, if not the biggest of Chris's reoccurring issues is his pacing. Interstellar has what feels like multiple endings, and I hate to say it, but the bookcase ending, it is convoluted, it is confusing, but I think more importantly, it doesn't mesh with the rest of the film's like rooted in reality themes. It feels like it's an add-on, and for those reasons, Interstellar is B-tier Nolan. If following is what made people stop, then Memento is the film that made people pay attention to Nolan. I am coming hot off of a recent watch of Memento, and do I dare say it didn't quite slap as hard as I remember. The beginning and end meet in the middle idea is dope as hell, and like I say, it's the kind of idea that makes people pay attention and ask, like, wait, who made this? Who wrote this? What else has he done? Memento, from a pure entertainment perspective, is great, but when it's looked at critically and broken down, the holes appear and it just starts to take on some water. A cop lets a disabled person murder people, and then there's some issues with Leonard. He's remembering some things that he should probably forget, and he's forgetting stuff he should maybe remember. It's hard to know exactly the rules. And then the characters, they're relatively shallow. There's not any depth. Another issue of Nolan's. And especially when you bring in the Sammy Jenkins stuff, it's just kind of hard to relate and empathize with Leonard. It just kind of falls apart. It's just not as tight as I remembered in the past. I have a feeling that this one's going to piss people off, but the facts are the facts. Memento is Nolan's C tier. Oppenheimer, a biopic about the guy responsible for the atomic bomb. Instead of time, Chris plays with perspective, which is new, and once you understand it, it enhances the enjoyment on rewatch. So that all feels and tracks, it feels like Christopher Nolan. It is Nolan's slowest film, and it is also his least mentally stimulating. And by that, what I mean is there's no need for 20-minute exposition dumps where even after the exposition dump, you still don't get it. This is a nonfiction about people and things that we know and have heard about. Oppenheimer is Nolan's best acted film. I think he has half of Hollywood in it, though, so it better be freaking good. You can tell now that Nolan is like top dog, that when actors get chosen by him, they are bringing their A game. Oppenheimer was the hardest movie to judge out of the bunch, I feel like, because it's just so much different from the rest of his filmography. It's it's the only nonfiction, it's the only biopic. It just sort of feels different, and it was hard to kind of figure out what to do with it. So how do you judge it? Where does it belong with it feeling so different and being so dissimilar from his other movies? Where does it objectively belong in the definitive Nolan ranking? It belongs right here, D tier. Now, I'm sure that I just lost basically all the viewers, so see you later. But to the one person still left, I'm sure you're asking why. Why? Because someone else could have made Oppenheimer. It doesn't change how great Oppenheimer is as a movie, and it is great, but there isn't anything inherently Nolan about it. And you might say, the practicals, the IMAX production, the black and white, back and forth perspective shifting, yada, yada. I mean, there's a handful of things that you could point at and maybe say that, these are Nolan. But when it comes down to it, let me just remind you, Nolan is epic. Nolan is bigger than life. He is innovative. He's heady. Nolan is spectacle. That's why we go to see his movies. That's why we love his movies. Nolan is not extreme close-up talking head for 2 hours. And that puts this movie lower in his overall ranking because it's not him. It has parts of him, but it's not why we go to see Nolan movies. Prestige. Oh, mama. Okay. It's a perfect film. It is. The movie itself is a magic trick, but it's not just like a magic trick. It's the very same magic trick that we're watching. He gives us the answer over and over and over, and we don't see it. And Alfred, just remind us why we don't want to see it.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
No, the other one.
You're here to corrupt one of my brightest.
No, the other one.
I assume you're familiar with the Soviet era.
The other one.
I failed you. want to be fooled.
Prestige is one of the most complete, airtight, and competent films ever made. Everything is multi-layered and comes around full circle. It's dramatic, engaging, and infinitely rewatchable. A tier. Tenet. Last but not least. Okay, so all of those things that I said about what makes Nolan before, him being epic, bigger than life, innovative, heady, him being, spectacle. Well, Tenet is all of those things and more. So it's an easy A tier, right? No. And you know that it's not A tier because you've seen the movie. If Tenet is quintessential Nolan, then what's the deal? Story. The story is the deal. The story is king. It's always king. What Tenet tries to do is it tries to use themes and ideas as its story, and it doesn't work. It never works when you do that. It doesn't matter how many practical effects you use. It doesn't matter how amazing your cinematography is or your editing or how crazy your mind-bendingly high concept idea is if you don't first explain your ideas and concepts in an easy and digestible way. We don't need to completely understand it. And this is true for all of his other movies, right? Where we just need to get the gist. We just need to partially understand it. And to Chris's point,
don't try to understand it. Feel it.
No, we can't just feel it. Not in a movie like this that touts its complex palindrome theme just begging to be analyzed. And second, you've got to make the audience care for and empathize with, at very least, the protagonist. John David Washington, he didn't ruin this film, but he did hurt it. He's stiff and written. He's unconvincing. He's unbelievable. He reminds you the whole time that you are watching a movie.
How?
And with Tenet specifically, you need a main character to really sell this world and sell this concept to us.
We think it's a type of inverse radiation triggered by nuclear fission.
Just imagine if in Inception, Leo didn't really care. We didn't know his name. He didn't ask any questions. He just kind of went with it. He thought it was cool. No big deal. He's just doing a job.
Instinct. Got it.
It would have sucked. There would have been no emotional connection with the characters. And there is no emotional connection with any of these characters, except maybe Robert Pattinson as Neil. Tenet is an empty shell. It is just the idea alone, the idea of a film palindrome. And it accomplishes that idea really, really well, for better or for worse. Its positives and its negatives, they are Nolan. Because of that, it might be the most Christopher Nolan movie of all of his films. It contains most of his good qualities and most of his bad qualities. D tier. Well, let me hear it. How definitive really is this ranking of Christopher Nolan's filmography? Is it the most objective and uncontested Nolan ranking on the internet? Let me know in the comments below. I am trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I would be extremely grateful if you subscribed. The only way to get monetized is to have 1,000. So if you just would click that button below, I'd be super grateful. Thank you for watching my videos, and thank you for your support. See ya. Batman Begins. There's a reason that Batman doesn't have a mustache. Wow, this is hard to do with this mask on. My watching... I cannot see the camera. Might not know how big of a deal this movie was. You haven't heard from me. Holy cow, this thing's poking me in the eyeball. And I know I say potentially. Holy cow, it's hard to breathe in this freaking mask. Okay. And B tier. Holy moly, this is freaking hard to... Can't see jack shit.